This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so our Lunch and Learn is focusing on this idea that the Hanukkah struggle was not a once-off struggle between us and the society at large, but that is a struggle that has continued, and it continues until today, once we will give the parameters and categorize and get a deeper, better understanding of what was actually happening then. So let's begin with from Rabbi Yitzchak Berkovitz, which is from the Jerusalem Kollel, Eish HaTorah. Let's begin with that. The striking aspect of celebrating Hanukkah each year is the realization that the very same ideological battles that were fought some 2,200 years ago, which prompted the Syrian-Greek offensive against the Jewish people, culminating in the Hanukkah miracles, are still being waged today and are pointedly relevant to the life of every Jew, right? Almost on a daily basis. Let's hear. The Syrian-Greek war against Israel, replete with tank-like elephants, over 100,000 skilled soldiers, seems like an anomaly to Greek philosophy. The Greeks, home to the schools of Plato and Aristotle, sought to systematically understand and classify knowledge of the world. They were primarily intellectuals, not militants, right? This is Athens, not Sparta. Why would the Syrian Greek army attack the Jewish nation? Israel was not a military threat. The Syrian Greek target was Judaism, and Judaism alone. Jews who adopted the Greek worldview, Hellenism, were embraced. So they were not fighting against the Jews, they were fighting against Judaism. That was what they were fighting against. Hellenism was certainly a challenge for many Jews attracted to the intellectualism and logic of the Greek culture that postulated that man created religion. Right? Not that God created man, but man created God. Man had this need to reach beyond, and therefore this need of mankind created religion. Nevertheless, what was so appalling to the Syrian Greeks that they sought to destroy Judaism and her adherents? The Greeks taught that man was the center of the universe. There is no God. One does not look beyond the physical world. It is man who has the need to create God. And it's fascinating that that one of the largest religions of the world created God in the image of man, as opposed to viewing man as created in the image of God, created God in the image of man. So the Greeks taught it as man who has the need to create God. In contrast, Judaism teaches that man is almost at the center of the universe. But the primary focus is God who created, sustains, and guides the universe, creates man with a divine soul, and empowers us with the ability to impact both this world and eternal spiritual worlds that transcend physical existence. The Greeks could not tolerate that the Jewish people lived Judaism as a dynamic reality, which was an affront and a threat to Greek thought and culture. 2,200 years later, the Jewish world is still divided between those influenced by Hellenism, who view Hanukkah and Judaism as tradition, something of sentimental value that contributes some meaning to life, but ultimately is not real. And in contrast, those who see Judaism as a reality, where each action that we take has cosmic implications. So this was the Greeks fighting against a mindset that ran contrary and almost undermined the view that they sought to teach the entire world. And we live in a time where there's a new famous buzzword called cancel culture, which means that no one can think differently than I. And if you're thinking differently than I, either going to the left or going to the right, wherever I am, if you're thinking differently, that is not considered to be a valid, reasonable thought. Anything that differs from the way I view, cancel. Yes, Steve.
Uh, um, I know how we observe today, but 2,000 years ago or 2,200 years ago was Jewish observance and thought similar to what we have now? Because when you make statements about how we were so different from the rest of the world, I understand that in terms of what I relate to now, but I'm just wondering what it was like then, and how different were we, how unique were we?
I believe it was similar, meaning we had those who sought to assimilate, the Hellenists, but we had those who were keeping to the Torah mitzvot. And again, well, if you just look a second further, Steve, on the page here, right? I have a timeline. So let's just look at the timeline for a minute, then I'll return to your point, Steve. Right? The building of the second temple was the year 353 BCE, Jewish year 3408. Right? We're now at 5782. 175 before the Common Era, Antiochus reigns. 168, the temple is desecrated by Antiochus. 165, the Hashmonaim regain control of the temple, Hanukkah. Then from 140 to 36 BCE, the Hashmonaim ruled. Then rule of the Roman governors, Herodian dynasty. And 68 CE, the Common Era, Romans destroy the second temple. So during this time, the Torah laws, of course, were in place since Sinai. And any rabbinic additions, institutions, thinking about Shabbos candles, thinking about the laws of Muktzah, different rabbinic institutions were also in place. And certainly the mindset that is the foundation for all of this was, the hashkafa, the outlook, was certainly in place. So I would say, yes, just like today, you've got those who are strictly adhering and living it, and those who view it as, at best, a nice culture. I would say then, too, those who were adhering were certainly adhering, right? What type of kippahs did they wear? What type of head coverings? I'm sure whatever fit into the time over there. But in terms of the basis, in terms of the Torah and mitzvot, I would say that was the same. Right? And that really is a fascinating point that you're bringing up. If you would take a person living in Rome today and put him back into ancient Rome, or take a person living in Greece today and put him back into ancient Greece, they would not have all that much in common. But take a Jew today, an observant Jew today, and put him back 2,000 years, I think we'd have very, very much in common. We'd have the same Torah reading every week. We'd have we wouldn't yet have the same commentators, the later commentators on the Chumash, but the practices, the mitzvot, would be the same. Okay, let's go to source number 2 on the next page, which is the Jewish Study Network, a Hanukkah reader. The Greeks' cultural influence spreads. The story behind the events Hanukkah begins with the Greek conquest of the kingdom of Judea by the military forces of Alexander the Great in 320 BCE. Not content to be mere military conquerors, the Greeks maintained a vision of conquest that extended beyond just physical subjugation. They wanted their culture to dominate the world, and hence always sought to spread its influence within the territories under their control. Long before the actual events of Hanukkah took place, Greek culture, known as Hellenism, started to make itself felt with very powerful inroads within the Jewish population. As Paul Johnson notes in his book, The History of the Jews, the impact of Hellenization on educated Jews was in many ways similar to the impact of the Enlightenment on the 18th century ghetto. It was a destabilizing force spiritually, and above all, it was a secularizing, materialistic force. In response to Hellenization, that's what I was saying to you before, Steve, that as today we have those who Judaism is at best a culture, but basically there's no recognizable difference between the way they lead their lives and the way the nations around us lead their lives. And there are those who make Judaism what they are, who they are, what they're about. So too then, in response to Hellenization, internal conflict soon arose within the Jewish people as those who favored the new trend confronted those who did not. And that is, very tragically, a recurring situation, a recurring theme that we've had. That those who decide to reject the way Jews have practiced Judaism are not content that they will reject it and do what they want, but they want to convince everyone that this is the new Judaism, this is the correct path. So they confronted those who did not. Eventually, they developed a movement of Jews whose aim it was to force the pace of Hellenization by purging Judaism of those elements that limited the advancement of Greek culture. Right? You're holding us back. You are an embarrassment. Famous story, I believe, with Rabbi Abraham Twersky, who was a world-renowned psychologist and a Hasidic Jew and rabbi. And on a Motzei Shabbat, I believe the story was with him, he was dressed in his full Hasidic garb, waiting for a bus. And a woman walked over to him and said to him, "You're such an embarrassment. You're such an embarrassment to Judaism, prancing about in this archaic costume that's so outdated. Why don't you get with the times? You're a walking embarrassment to Jews." So Rabbi Twersky said to her as follows, "I beg thy pardon, but I doth not understandeth thy words, for I am Amish. And these are the ways that we have been acting and dressing for centuries." And this woman almost fell off her feet, started apologizing. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I have only the deepest respect for the way the Amish people hold to their traditions and don't bend with every twist and turn of society." And after she finished pontificating, he said to her, "Well, actually, I, like you, am a Jew. But why can you respect it when it comes to others, and you're so embarrassed when it comes to yourself?" Right? And that is, unfortunately, a almost recurring theme. So there was a movement of Jews whose aim it was to force the pace of Hellenization. It wasn't happening fast enough, so it took Jews to force the pace, purging Judaism of the elements that limited the advancement of Greek culture. In the year 175 BCE, these Jewish Hellenizers gained a powerful ally with the ascendancy of Antiochus IV Epiphanes to the throne of the Seleucid Syrian Greek Empire. Like those before him, Antiochus was disturbed to find the Jews still holding on to their own religion and worshiping their own God in blatant disregard of the Greek deities. To further advance the cause of Hellenization, he issued decrees banning any religious or cultural practices not in line with Hellenism, particularly the observance of Brit Milah. Don't desecrate the beautiful body that you have. Shabbat, right? What creation the world always was. Rosh Chodesh, right? The lunar months that you control, these holidays. Antiochus was a vicious dictator bent on the destruction of Judaism. Women who circumcised their babies were executed with their dead babies hung around their necks, as it says in Maccabees. A special directive was also sent to stop the sacrificial service in the temple. The temple itself in 168 BC was desecrated and turned into a place where non-kosher animals were offered to the pagan gods. So faithful Jews were under increasing pressure of religious persecution, not just by the Greeks, but by the Hellenized Jews. And this is something I believe that we had also in the Soviet Union. Rosa, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that amongst the communists, they would encourage the children to rat out, to report parents if they were still maintaining religious practices. Is that correct, Rosa? Yeah. So persecution was coming not just from the powers that be it the Soviet Union or what we're discussing over here, the Greek Empire, but it also came from the Jews who had abandoned ship and often became our worst persecutors. However, there were two miracles that occurred that saved the Jewish people from this Greek infiltration. Let's go to source number 3. Again, continuing from the Jewish Study Network. The efforts to homogenize Judaism with Greek culture met resistance from those Jews opposed to Hellenization, those stubborn Jews. Pious Jews willingly martyred themselves before the face of imposed apostasy, but isolated incidences of resistance eventually developed into outright rebellion. The initial military revolt was led by Judah the Maccabee. An epitaph awarded him for his famous battle cry, Mi chamocha be'elim Hashem, what we sing every Friday night. Every Marav we say, Mi chamocha be'elim Hashem. Who is like you amongst the heavenly powers, Hashem? And take the first letters, Mi chamocha, Mem chaf, be'elohim Hashem, Bet, Yud, and you have Maccabee. The word Maccabee being an acronym formed by the first letters of Mi chamocha be'elim Hashem. Judah was joined by his 5 brothers, all sons of Mattatyahu, patriarch of the priestly Hashmonaim family. Legend has it that a Seleucid general once described these 5 Jewish heroes as stronger than lions. Okay. Despite the extraordinary odds stacked against them, the children of Mattatyahu miraculously succeeded in their battle against the Greeks. Without divine intervention, the enemy would have swiftly crushed this small band of religious Jews. Instead, after a short period of intense fighting, the Maccabees freed Jerusalem from Seleucid control, isolated the Hellenized Jews to the northern port city of Acre. Finally, on the 25th day of the month of Kislev, the Maccabees returned to the temple. As they set about repairing all that had been vandalized, God had a second miracle in store. When the pagan Hellenists invaded, They desecrated the menorah and sabotaged the oil reserves. When they finally regained control, they could find only one jug of oil fit for the lighting of the new menorah. The Jews used the little oil they found, and something extraordinary happened, as we know. It kept on burning day after day for 8 days, even though there was enough oil for only one, giving them the time they needed to produce new, pure oil. By day 9, we were ready to go on our own. And of course, the Hanukkah festival that we're celebrating now was instituted for all generations to follow these miracles. The root of this battle between the nation of Israel and the Greek nation actually has its biblical roots. And we'll see it didn't have to be as bad as it got. It didn't have to be bad at all. We hear about Shem and Yefet in Bereshit, source number 4. Yefet was the father of a number of sons. One of the sons of Yefet was Yavan. Shem, as in Semite, right? We are the descendants from Shem, the son of Noah. Let's read in Bereshit. The sons of Noah who emerged from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Yefet. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were Noah's sons. The world was populated through them. Noah began to be a man of the soil, planted a vineyard, drank from the wine, Vayishkar, and became drunk, Vayitgal, and he was uncovered in his tent. Ham saw the father's nakedness, told his brothers outside. Shem and Yefet took a cloak and placed it on both their shoulders. They walked backwards so as not to see their father's nakedness, covered their father's nakedness, faced away from him, and did not see the nakedness. Noah awoke from his wine-induced sleep, and he realized what his youngest son had done to him. Cursed is Canaan. He shall be a slave to his brothers. Blessed be God, the Lord of Shem. Canaan shall be his slave. May God expand Yefet. Yaft Elokim liyefet. May God expand Yefet, or the beauty of God should go to Yefet. And he will dwell, v'yishkon ba'alei Shem. He will dwell in the tents of Shem. So the beauty of Yefet, one of Noah's sons, the father of Yavan, was meant to dwell in the tents, in the study halls, so to speak, of Shem. What does this mean? The Gemara, our sages, the Talmud understands from this blessing that the Greeks had certain virtues that were worthy of our respect. A Torah scroll must be written in Hebrew. There's one other language that a Torah scroll could be written in, and that is Greek. The Gemara Megillah says, Af b'svarim lo hitiru. Any allowance to write in another language was only Yevanit. The only allowance to write a Torah scroll in a different language was in Greek. What's the reason? Our pasuk. Yaft Elokim liyefet v'yishkon ba'alei Shem. The words of Yefet, the language of Yefet, the Greek language, can dwell in our tents, in the tents of the Jewish people, in the tents of Shem's descendants. A Torah scroll can be written in Greek. The Gemara Megillah also tells the story, right? This is number 6, that what we know as the Septuagint. That was they wanted the Torah to be translated into Greek. The Gemara tells us, Maza b'Talmi Amelech, Ptolemy the king gathered 72 elders, put them in 72 separate rooms, did not tell them why they were summoned, and he told them, Kitvili Torat Moshe Rabchem. Write for me, translate for me, the Torah of Moses, your teacher. Which means, as the Maharal says, that they had this want for wisdom. They had this want for understanding. The Maharal writes, Kol inyan ha-malchut zeh, the whole feature of this nation, hayu mevakshim ha-chachma, they were seeking wisdom, understanding. Lefikach, that's why they wanted the Chachamim, the sages, to write the Torah into Greek, as the Gemara quoted above. This shows us that they were inclined towards wisdom more than the other nation. And certainly the world today bears the mark of Greek influence. Language, politics, education, philosophy, science, art, Olympics, right? Certainly our world is greatly influenced by the ancient Greeks, and the Torah, Jews recognize there is intellectual virtue that the Greeks had and have. Now, the Jews are known as the people of the book, right? That's how we're known. So we certainly had an appreciation for their wisdom. And Rambam, in his Moreh Nevuchim, in his Guide to the Perplexed, quotes Aristotle very often with his views and his understandings, not of Torah, but of Chachma, but of wisdom. And Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch writes as follows. In Bereshit, the Torah says, our pasuk, Yafta Lakim Yefet, the beauty of Yefet, right? Let it reside in the tents of shame. In Yefet come together reason and desire for the spiritual. Yefet reached its peak in the culture of Yavan, Greece. Until today, these two remain. Yisroel, Israel, and Yavan, representing Sinai and humanism. Yefet beautified the world from an aesthetic point of view, while Shem enlightened the world from an ethical, moral perspective. Yefet prepares the ground for the mission of Shem. First, let a person be imbued with the ideas of the beautiful and the good in the spirit of the Greeks. Afterwards, let him proceed to be imbued with that which is still more beautiful and elevated and harmonious, which is the godly. There was a conflict, Rav Hirsch writes, between two perspectives of life, two cultures, which until today are struggling for dominance in the world. The Greek nation stood at the pinnacle of culture. Of all the descendants of Yefet, the Greeks taught to all other nations the beautiful and explained that which is beautiful is also good. However, at the pinnacle of the culture of the children of Shem stood Aver, whose descendants became the Hebrew nation, which plants its tents according to the will of Hashem, in order to sanctify his name. They build the temple of justice and love. The mission of both cultures is to cover the animalistic nakedness in man, as both Shem and Yefet did with Noach. Both were destined to raise man to the level of the human and the godly, and to subdue by proper education the influence of Cham, the hot-blooded roughneck who desires the animalistic nakedness. All of the history of the world till our day represents the constant struggle regarding the above prophecy of Yafta Lakim Yefet. The beauty of God was given to Yefet, let it dwell in the tents of shame. Until the appearance of the Greeks, the human spirit, human feeling develops only under the influence of necessity, the events of life. Man found no opportunity to develop self-respect. He recognized only fear as a motivation and a means to overcome desires. But from his essential nature, man remained mean-spirited, cruel, narrow-minded, and enslaved. The culture of Greece aroused the desire for logic and enlightenment, a feeling of yearning for great ideas, the opening of the spiritual life of a person through the contemplation of harmonious and beautiful essences of things, and by means of the control of his overwhelming desires. So did the culture of Greece develop the feeling of self-respect within man. It could arouse trust in oneself and give a person responsibility for the conduct of his life. In short, the spirit of Greece freed man from the chains which bound him, enlightened him with culture, beautified his spirit, filled him with the joy of a more exalted life. However, the spirit of enlightenment which emanated from Greece in its pure form never constituted a danger to the holy ways of Israel. Israel saw it as a contributing cause to the realization of its own destiny, the enlightenment of man and improvement. That it was always proper to bring into his tent the truth and the pure humanity associated with the Spirit. Let's take this a step further. Let's categorize it better, perhaps. Not better, but let's categorize it. There's body, there's mind, and there is soul. And the Greeks sought to elevate mankind beyond body to mind, but not to soul. They stopped at the mind. Let's take a look at the Ramban in Vayikra. Hamitchakmim b'teva hanimshachim acharei hayivani. Those wise people, scientists, go in the way of the Greek, Aristotle, he says, asher hikchish kol davar zulati o mugash lo, who denied the reality of anything that they cannot experience with their senses. The hegis daito, and had the fat-headedness, the arrogance, lachshov, to think, who, he, and his evil students, could call inyan shelo hisig elav hu b'svarto eino emet. If I can't understand it, if I don't understand it, then it can't be true. And tragically, we have that today, certainly. Right? I don't mean to beat up on the Soviet Union, Rosa, but I think a famous quote from the cosmonauts was that they went up to the heavens and they did not find God. They dissected the human body and did not find the soul. If I can't find it, if I can't see it in a physical sense, it doesn't exist. And if it doesn't make sense to my 4 square inches of gray matter, then it can't be true. Which, of course, if we are believing in a God that created the universe and the DNA in each and every one of our cells, then of course we're not going to be able to limit him to our understanding. And today we have different groups of Judaism, which will say if it doesn't make sense, there's no reason to do it, which once again is limiting God and the universe to 4 square inches of not overly intelligent gray matter. So that is where the Greeks stopped. That is where their culture stopped. And that is what we are fighting today also. That if science doesn't enforce it, then it can't be true. What we can understand, what we can figure out, or make sense to us, that is the God, that is the ceiling. And if it doesn't make sense to us, then it's not true. Then it can't be true. Let's take a look at this essay or a synopsis from Rav Hutner. Number 10, there was an intense commitment by the Greeks to intellectual inquiry, an effort to understand the natural world. And that's beautiful. I've mentioned many times, I took I didn't actually take, but I kind of took a biology course 2 summers ago with my daughter, trying to understand the human body. And to me, it was incredible. It was such a chizuk. It was such an eye-opener in the wonders of creation, reading just how much we understand, how there's parts that we still don't understand and parts that we thought were junk DNA, they called it. And now we understand the purposes that it serves. And that's only a glimmer of all that else that we still don't understand. So it's beautiful to look into the world and to appreciate it, but to recognize it as God's handiwork and to be in awe of what he has done. However, Greek philosophy and thought was dominated by their fixation on nature, where human choice plays no role, what we call determinism. You don't play any role. You are programmed. The world is programmed. You're programmed. It's your DNA. It's your environment. No responsibility. This intellectual fixation made it impossible for the Greeks to comprehend or appreciate the Jews' Torah, which is totally rooted in the spiritual world created by God and sustained through human choice. Na'aseh Adam, let us make man. Famously, we partner with God in making man. Which man do we partner with God in making? Yourself. Look in the mirror. That is the person that you partner with God in making. While both Israel and the Greeks were highly intellectual, the Greeks viewed reality through the lens of the physical world, where compulsion rules. Through their study of nature and the constellation, the Greeks saw the world as mechanical, automatic. They then extended the rules of nature to all aspects of life. So that Greek wisdom and intellect inexorably led to the development of philosophy that drove the Greeks to misunderstand and oppose Jewish intellectualism. We value wisdom, but we understand that Torah is above that. Torah is wisdom that comes from a heavenly, divine, much loftier source. And lastly, Rav Destler in number 11. Through the total and absolute dedication of the Hashmonaim to Judaism, they rose to the level of being purely selfless in their commitment. And this was the essential spiritual reason they merited to overcome the Greeks. And the miracle of the oil that the lights were not extinguished showed them a sign from heaven, which revealed that their hearts contained an inner light. Beautiful how Rav Destler writes it. It was that their hearts contain an inner light. We've mentioned before that the windows of the temple were small on the inside and larger on the outside. Normally, windows will have small on the outside, larger on the inside, so the light of the outside will enter and will spread and illuminate the whole area. In the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, it was the opposite. It was small on the inside, wide, large on the outside, because it's the light of the Torah, of the Beit HaMikdash, that illuminates the world. And the miracle of the lights was to let them know that we have an eternal inner light which illuminates the world. And there's body, there's mind, and there is soul. There is our intellectual knowledge, and there is a divine knowledge which supersedes that. And that is a battle that we fight until today. Until today, it is science, it is determinism, it is that whatever we can understand, the rest is all just our imagination. It's man creating God, as opposed to God creating man and giving us the ability to rise up and become godly ourselves. These battles of the intellectualism of science being the catch-all of that which we understand as being the upper limit of truth and if we can't understand it, then there's no validity to it. This battle of the Chashmonaim is our battle today. And the miracle of the lights that we kindle, that we re-experience and we kindle every night, is the idea that our light continues and shines. And it's not the garish flashing lights of a Las Vegas. It is the penetrating, simple, humble lights that have burned generation to generation to generation. And when we have today those Jews who are dropping their Judaism and then canceling those who do not and fighting against, that's no news. Tragically, that's old news. That's what happened with the Hellenists. That's what happened during the Enlightenment. That's what happened in the Soviet Union. That's what is happening today. And we continue to light those lights. And that is our incredible, incredible strength and stamina. I'll just conclude with an incredible story from Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust, of a story that took place in Bergen-Belsen about the Bluzhever Rebbe, Rabbi Yisroel Spira. Hanukkah came to Bergen-Belsen. It was time to kindle the Hanukkah lights. A jug of oil was not to be found, no candle was in sight, and a Chanukah belonged to the distant past. Instead, a wooden clog, the shoe of one of the inmates, became a Chanukah. Strings pulled from a concentration camp uniform became a wick. And the black camp shoe polish was the pure oil. The Rabbi of Bluzhev, Rabbi Yisroel Spira, lit the first light and chanted the first two blessings in his pleasant voice. And the festive melody was filled with sorrow and pain. When he was about to recite the third blessing, he stopped, turned his head, and looked around as if he were searching for something. But immediately he turned his face back to the quivering small lights and in a strong, reassuring, comforting voice chanted the third blessing. She'echianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh, who has kept us alive, preserved us, enabled us to reach this season. As soon as the rabbi had finished the ceremony of kindling the lights, Mr. Zamachowski, one of the leaders of the Warsaw Bund, found his way to the rabbi and said, Spira, you are a clever and honest person. I understand your need to light Hanukkah candles in these wretched times. I can even understand the historical note of the second blessing, who did miracles for our fathers in days of old at this season. But the fact that you recited the third blessing is beyond me. How could you thank God and say, blessed are you who has kept us alive and preserved us and enabled us to reach this season? How could you say it when hundreds of dead Jewish bodies are literally lying within the shadows of the Hanukkah lights? When thousands of living skeletons are walking around in camp and millions more are being massacred? For this you are thankful? For this you praise the Lord? This you call keeping us alive? The Bluzhever Rabbi responded, Zamachowski, you are 100% right. When I reached the third blessing, I also hesitated and asked myself, what should I do with this blessing? I turned my head in order to ask some of the distinguished rabbis who were there near me, should I recite the blessing? But just as I was turning my head, I noticed that behind me was a throng standing, a large crowd of living Jews, their faces expressing faith, devotion, and concentration as they were listening to the rite of the kindling of the Hanukkah lights. I said to myself, if God, blessed be He, has such a nation that at times like these, when during the lighting of the Hanukkah lights they see in front of them death looking from every corner, if despite all that they stand there with devotion listening to the Hanukkah blessing, who made miracles in days of old at the season, if I was blessed to see such a people with so much faith and fervor, then I am under a special obligation to recite the third blessing. Years later, the Lubavitcher Rebbe survived the war, remarried, and had a family, and received a message from this Zamachowski, who too survived the war. And the message was, "Thank you, Rebbe. The words that you shared with me that night gave me strength and hope and helped me to survive the war." The battle continues, my friend. We are the soldiers. We are the Chashmonaim. We are the ones who hold on proudly, resolutely, to who we are, to what we represent, to Hashem, to God. And we recognize there is body, there is mind, and we have to take great care of our body so we can all live good, healthy lives for as long as God grants us. And there is mind, and we need to use our mind to appreciate this incredible world that is around us. But to never forget that above that rides the neshama, the soul, the spirit. And that is what truly animates us, and that is truly the purpose of why we are here. And it's those lights that we kindle every year that remind us, as Rav Destler said, of the inner light that we contain that needs to continue to shine out throughout our life. Okay, my friends, we will call it over here. Shkoach everybody, a Hanukkah Sameach, a happy Hanukkah. We're going to be having a whole Hanukkah celebration at Shul Sunday night. All are welcome to join us. Good to see you, Roger. I never know if it's you or Janet. Good to see you, Roger.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to see you, my friend. Good to see everybody. Linda, good to see you, and Craig, and Rosa, and Steve. Hanukkah Sameach, everybody. Tomorrow night, we wish everybody a good Shabbos. Shabbos comes in early. I think Mincha tomorrow night, is at 4:25. We light the Chanukiah beforehand and come to Shul and light long enough candles or enough oil that it can burn until about 6 o'clock. So you might want to use Shabbos candles. If Shabbos candles won't fit into your Chanukiah, you could just line up tea lights. That could be your Chanukiah. You could line up the tea lights. They will burn the requisite amount, and that will be your Hanukkah candles to make sure that we light properly tomorrow night. A good day, everybody. A good week. A happy Hanukkah. A good Chodesh. A good Shabbos. It's all coming together this Shabbos. Good seeing everybody. Next Thursday, I am away, so we will resume Lunch and Learn in 2 weeks on December 16th. Be well, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very welcome.